Hello, ladies and gents. It's Justin Johnson on the module A225, Block 2, Confidence and Crisis, 1840 to 1880, edited by Loftus. I want to give a good reflection to the university itself, to Milton Keynes. I'm a student. I want to influence others, give them guidance for their study, how to keep methodical within study. Practice makes perfect. Also, getting a highlighting pen, highlighting words that we don't know the meaning of, and we're going to write down the meaning, understand the meaning of words. Here's a highlighting pen. I'm going to read the book methodically, and we're going to go back over our notes. I've got a book of notes, probably about 80 pages long. Gone through two books. Every 10 pages, I'll write a whole page for the notes. That's the way we learn methodically. And if you want to go and write your own novel, you can get your references out of the book and write your own story. Who, where, why, and when. Make an argument out of the assignment or the author's narrated story yourself. That's how many authors study history. Who, where, why, and when. Look at different disciplines of creating an argument also. In its aims, this unit will investigate the causes of poverty in England and Wales in the 19th century, elevate the impacts of different policies under the New Poor Law, explore some of the controversies and tensions surrounding the New Poor Law and its implementation. When we draw up a study, we look at new ways of learning, new ideas, different complexities that we can grasp onto to better our understanding of what the narrated story is. The Poor Law Amendment Act, passed in 1834, was one of the more diverse pieces of English legislation enacted by Parliament in the 19th century. As you know from Block 1, it was meant to overhaul what many believed to be a too generous system of relief. The old Poor Law. Under the old Poor Law, outdoor relief was common. This gave assistance to the poor in their own homes. In the early 19th century, as living standard declined, more people needed relief and the poor rates increased. In response, the new Poor Law was intended to bring about a modern, efficient and national system of poor relief in which a central poor law body made the rules for local boards of guardians to impose on the local population. Much of the controversy surrounding the new Poor Law emerged out of the principle of less eligibility. This aimed to discourage able-bodied claimants by ensuring that those in receipt of relief, on the whole, should not be made really or apparently as eligible as independent labourer of the lowest class. Senior 1905-1834. In practice, this meant that relief offered under the new Poor Law could not provide a standard living better than substance. Outdoor relief was to be limited, and many claimants were forced to enter the workhouse, in which they were separated according to the gender and, for able-bodied adults, at least required to work for keep. Controversy also emerged out of differences in perceptions of poverty and its causes. As you know from the unit, Managing Uncertainty, New Forms of Knowledge, Unit 4 in Block 1. In the early part of the century, poverty was widely felt to be a normal condition of life, an inevitable result of overpopulation and low wages, meaning that incomes were sometimes unable to sustain individuals and families. Pauperism was a legal status of those whose income was so low that they choose to apply to the poor law authorities for relief. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 signalled a shift in this definition. Harris 2004. While it was accepted that disabled and elderly people might generally fall on hard times, poverty and pauperism among the able-bodied was seen as a result of laziness and improvidence in claimants who assumed relief for the poor law authorities was easier than working and saving for unseen events such as sickness or unemployment. However, a number of crises in the mid-century challenged assumptions about the cause of poverty and the efficiency of new poor law. In turn, the responsible for the central authorities was to reform the system, but at the same time to restate the principles 1834 to further limit outdoor relief. This unit explores a new poor law in England and Wales. Section 1001 examines attitudes to poverty in mid-19th century and explains why poverty was a frequent feature of working people's lives. It also considers what, if anything, the new poor law can tell us about the age of Agrippius. As you may remember from the unit of the age of Agrippius and the Great Exhibition 1851, Unit 8, Agrippius was a term used to describe the optimism that the economic difficulties and such unrest of the early century could be resolved through a shared culture built around work and self-help. As you'll see in this unit, the poor law threatened such optimism. Section 10.2 describes how the poor law came under strain in the Hungry 40s, a period of high unemployment and widespread poverty. Section 10.3 looks at the workhouse and explores why it was such a central feature of poor relief. Section 10.4 examines how a scandal about starvation in a workhouse in Andover, Hampshire provoked widespread outrage. Section 10.5 explores problems associated with the new poor law that emerged during the Depression of the 1860s. Section 10.6 shows how one particular controversy emerged over the treatment of the poor law in casual wards. Spaces in the workhouse reserved for tramps. Section 10.7 considers how these crises began to challenge the principles of the new poor law and how the poor law authorities responded by restating these principles with what became known as a crusade against outdoor relief. Section 10.8 examines how new understandings of the cause of poverty in the late 19th century began to undermine the new poor law by questioning the assumptions made about the cause of poverty. As you'll see, the history of the poor law illustrates many of the topics of the module and Block 2 in particular. Perhaps more than any other subject, it shows the paradoxes and contradictions of the age. How optimism about the economic future of the nation existed alongside evidence of widespread poverty and why the principles of the new poor law were constantly restated despite numerous questions over its efficiency. It also shows how great ambition to produce a centralised system of poor relief organised around local boards or guardians and uniform workhouses nevertheless produced significant regional variations in practice. The new poor law and British Isle. The new poor law was implemented in England and Wales from 1834, and later variants of the law were devised, passed, and implemented in Ireland from 1838 and Scotland from 1845. The new poor laws in Ireland and Scotland were different in their application and operation from those in England and Wales. In Ireland, for instance, the workhouse did not necessarily serve the union as a parish or parishes, as one workhouse was placed in each town and several electoral divisions instead. In rural Scotland, the poor received outdoor relief, as it was impractical to build large workhouses, called poorhouses in Scotland, to serve a thinly spread population. This unit focused on the new poor law in England and Wales, but it is worth bearing in mind that the workhouse and the attempt to stigmatise poverty become common throughout all countries of the Victorian British Isle. 117. The new poor law in the age of Agrippius. Poor law reform was born out of the frustration of local ratepayers, who were increasingly concerned about the rising cost of relief in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The 2 million spent on relief in England and Wales in 1783 to 85 had doubled by 1802 to 03 and quadrupled by 1818. The population grew during these years too. So if we take that into account by looking at the cost per head, these had risen from 4 shillings in 1776 to 13 shillings in 1818. Harris 2004, page 43. Under pressure from ratepayers, a royal commission on the poor laws was set up by the government in 1832, with the task of investing the rising cost of poor relief. Its report suggested that the best way to reduce poverty and poor rate would be by deterring the poor from claiming relief through the threat of workhouse and by enforcing the principle of less eligibility. The aim was to discourage the able bodied, those who could make a living from their own labour, from entering the workhouse and to encourage more deserving groups, such as elderly people, to seek help from the family or local charities. Such a strategy could work only if outdoor relief delivered by the poor law authorities to claimants in their own homes come to an end. Forcing people to rely on themselves, their family or local charity, and, if absolutely desperate, on the workhouse, the Commission gradually issued general orders prohibiting the delivery of outdoor relief to able-bodied men and their families. Eligibility was restricted to widows with children, or to cases of emergency. As Poor Law Commission formed, at the end of the Royal Commission was headed by three commissioners who would direct the implementation of the new poor law. They sent out assistant commissioners to encourage parishes to unite to form the new poor law unions with central workhouse. By 1838, 573 new poor law unions had formed in England and Wales. These covered 8% of the parishes, with a further 30 years after laws were passed that dismantled all remaining systems associated with the poor law. The whole of England and Wales operated according to the new poor law system. By the 1840s, the new poor law was well established but no less controversial than the old system had been. It had a reputation for a meanness and uncaring dictation from the centre. Paris 2006. Anti-poor law riots took place in the northern manufacturing towns in the late 1830s, and resistance was particularly fierce in Wales. In the Rebecca riots of 1843 to 44, workhouses were specifically targeted. England in 1998, just over a decade after its introduction, the new poor law was held in disrepute, and it remained controversial for the rest of the country and into the next. How then did it endure for the long, and what, if anything, can it tell us about the so-called age of Equippus? Answering each question requires an understanding of what those who supported the poor law thought it would achieve. As you know from Unit 4, the poor law was passed by a reformed parliament influenced by new ideas, political economy and utilitarianism. It put in place a national system of relief for the poor law, the sick, orphans and lunatics, organised by an ambitious state, confident it could deal with a social economic problem without raising rates or taxes. More than this, it was consciously devised to reform society and to modernise the economy. Supporters thought that the poor law had helped cause poverty through the generous system of outdoor relief that interfered with the free market. They thought that the new poor law would help restore the proper balance. This conviction was strong enough for many politicians, ratepayers and poor law guardians to maintain faith in the new system. Through the mid-century, despite frequent scandal and constant controversy, as Josie Harris has argued, the spectre of the so-called Speen-Hamland system, the relief of the lax poor law administration before 1834, had brought the nation to the brink of bankruptcy, overpopulation, and moral ruin. It was a living object lesson in official poor law thinking right down to 1914. Read the extract below of the Poor Law Commissioner's report of 1834. The author, Nassau Senior, 1790 to 1864, pictured in figure 10.1. Was an influential economist and lawyer in the 1830s and 1840s, interested in how political economy could be used to shape government policy. He was a member of the Royal Commission of 1832 and, along with Edwin Chadwick in 1800s and 1890, whom you encountered in Unit 4, and of the chief architects of the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834. In his extract, he describes how the poor law received cash in exchange for work under the poor law. After Henry Wyndham Phillips, Nassau Williams Senior, 1855, stipple engraving, 25 to 15 centimetre plate, National Portrait Collection, London Reference Collection. How does the senior characterise the impact of the poor law on the people? Labourer feels that the existing system, though it generally gives him low wages, also gives him easy work. It gives him also, strange as it might appear, what he values more, a sort of independence. He need not bestir himself to seek work. He need not study to please his master. He need not put any restraint upon his temper. He need not ask relief as a favour. He has all a slave's security for subsistence, without his liability to punishment as a single man. Indeed, his income does not exceed a bare subsistence, but he has to marry, and it increases. Even then, it is equal to the support of a family. But it rises on the birth of every child. If his family is numerous, the parish becomes his principal paymaster, for small as the usual allowance of 2 shillings a head.